There's a lot of buzz around this concept of context engineering, why it matters in the world of AI.
The context engineering is a field that is already ingrained and that is going to be ingrained in the architecture of all AI systems that are being built.
Sometimes you hear someone say content engineering. That's the wrong phrase. It's context. I mean, one of the most interesting things about AI in my perspective, it's hard to ask questions. It's easy to get answers.
Getting the answer back is easy. Whatever you ask, you are going to get back some answer.
Correct.
Now, whether that answer is fit for purpose or not is a question.
Right.
The kind of features that we get out of ChatGPT or Gemini, 80% of them are actually not to do with the model, actually results of beautiful context engineering. Creation of the human mind, I can possibly relate that to creation of the models. So Journeybuilder is actually the direction towards changing consumer choices of I want to take control of my learning, what I want to define, what I want to learn, how I want to learn.
Yes. When you talk to our Astro agent on Journeybuilder, one of the first questions we ask is, how do you prefer learning?
New kind of cyber threats that are emerging with large language based application, context injection.
So what is prompt injection?
So prompt injection is
I'm Paul Siegel, founder of Starweaver. In the world of technology, we have so many different tools that allow creativity to become more powerful. I'm really pleased to introduce today's session with Manastas Gupta, an AI expert and a professional who I have a huge amount of respect for, and I'm proud to be collaborating with him. It's great to have another episode of Meet the Gurus. I've been doing this for quite a bunch of years, and what I found is meeting interesting people changes everything. It really changes your context and your view of life and the way you do your work. So what I like to start out with, Manas, is just learning a little bit more about you. I know about you, but I think a lot of people who are listening and may not know as much. So take me a little through your history and your background and what you're doing today.
All right. So a lot of what I am today is not by sheer planning towards a destination. A lot of it also by accident, especially my coming into AI. So I was in a corporate job like a lot of us, and I was working for multinationals, some multinational banks like Royal Bank of Scotland and Australian New Zealand Bank, the ANZ Bank, etc. And in executive positions like divisional head positions. And then I started feeling like, let me get back nearer to technology. I started out my technology journey as a mainframe developer, and I still love to go back as a mainframe developer, no doubt about that. But then I tried to come back near to technology, and I picked up AI as my topic of choice. And I went back to school, did my master's about 5 years back, and there I am with a lot of product development going on within our teams at this moment.
And this session, we're really going to get deep into the discussion on context engineering. The entire framework of Meet the Gurus has all been about technology, business, and design. And those are very big areas, but they're intersecting. And often when there's one emphasis on one and not the other, it often ends in something that is not a very good implementation, whether it's a product or service, et cetera. And you're doing an extensive amount of education in AI, building courses, building curriculums, delivering content, whether it's recording or preparing materials, and speaking to and connecting with tens of thousands of students. Isn't that true?
Yes, absolutely. And what I love about that is not only the education part, but the research and learning that is involved as the background side of delivering those content, those education, engaging with students with the new content, new technologies, and that's very, very charming for me.
And one of the interesting things that I found, and I think you would agree, that in education, it feels sometimes people think it's a one-way street, but it's a two-way street, right? It's the feedback that you get from the students and understanding who they are so that you can communicate knowledge at a level, in a way, and in a frame that they can absorb, right? They're like, multi-celled animals like we all are, but you figure out how do you absorb that knowledge. So this comes to the point of this discussion about context. And in AI, there's a lot of buzz around this concept of context engineering. And so context matters, and tell me why it matters in the world of AI.
To somebody who is in the field of AI, it's perhaps quite obvious, not so much possibly to the business people who are designing or conceptualizing systems. So the context engineering is a field that is going to be ingrained, that is already ingrained, and that is going to be ingrained in the architecture of all AI systems that are being built, serving businesses through different various kinds of features. Right? Let's say, for instance, context engineering is deeply ingrained in the way that all of us interact with AI through the tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, etc., etc. Now, whether we realize it or not, what the kind of features that we get out of ChatGPT or Gemini, 80% of them are actually not to do with the model. 80% of the features that we gain out of ChatGPTs of the world are actually results of beautiful context engineering. Mm-hmm. Say, for instance, you are conversing with ChatGPT in a thread. Now, you expect ChatGPT to remember a lot of things about yourself, and how does it happen is absolutely through context engineering. Mm-hmm. Now, there are very smart ways of context engineering that are built within ChatGPT, which deal with extracting the right kind of information from the conversations that you are having with ChatGPT, compressing the memory of your conversational thread so that it doesn't become so big that the LLM model, the large language model, isn't able to handle it. So all those techniques are part of context engineering. So even in the world of the common people who don't deal with technology per se, but deal with or interact with tools like ChatGPTs and Gemini, are actually benefiting from context engineering.
Sometimes you hear someone say content engineering. That's the wrong phrase. It's context. But one part of context presumably is capturing information in the form of a question. Often people are challenged. I mean, one of the most interesting things about AI in my perspective has been, it's hard to ask questions. It's easy to get answers. And getting someone to provide information or the model understanding the person through the question they ask is part of the context. Is that right?
Absolutely. And the ability to frame your question, I mean, you mentioned that getting the answer back is easy. Now, whatever you ask, you are going to get back some answer.
Correct.
Now, whether that answer is fit for purpose or not is a question.
Right.
Now, then, if the question was not appropriately constructed, then you are not going to get an answer which is fit for your purpose, and then you are going to go into a cycle of iteration, refinement, etc., till you get back to the position. Now, that is okay when you are talking to ChatGPTs. You can go through iterations of refining your questions and iterating through it to get to the final answer. But then when you are talking about developing AI systems, you don't have that opportunity. When the developer or the context engineer is building their or constructing their contexts within the prompts or besides the prompts, it has to be accurate. It has to be very, very specific to get the right answer back to the user.
So the inputs come from the user on one level, but can't they also come from the industry? And let's use an example of a model that is employed or deployed in banking or in aerospace or in pharmaceutical or any other sector. Presumably, the person who asks a question about something in one field versus another should be getting different answers, right? So if I'm an organization and I don't want just a generic answer that anyone can get on any AI model today, but I want one that's relevant to healthcare or to biopharma or to complex financial products. How does one go about feeding that model? And I'm sure I'm using the wrong concept, but how does one engineer the context to be relevant to, let's say, an organization, a university? A university might be, there might be a arts and sciences or history-oriented model, and then one might be one that's related to biology.
Absolutely.
So how do you go about the process of building those models? Let's start with the conceptual level.
But there can be different models you can work with, right? So at this moment, we are dealing with frontier models. So let's say, for instance, the ChatGPT uses the GPT models, which is a frontier model, or Meta's Llama is a frontier model, or Gemini's Gemini models are frontier models, or Claude or DeepSeek, and et cetera, et cetera. These are frontier models which are huge in size and extremely capable, extremely broad-based, right? However, here your question is about domain specificity.
A more specialized model.
Specialized models. Now, the problem with the frontier model is that these frontier models are publicly hosted. Now, if you are an organization which is privacy sensitive, then you may not choose to go to those frontier models which are publicly hosted. So in that case, you will tilt towards using models within your own data center, right? And when you try to do that, inferencing from huge frontier models becomes extremely expensive. So setting up the whole infrastructure for those hosting and inferencing from those frontier models becomes very, very expensive. Even in cloud, it's very, very expensive. So what is the alternative? You can go to domain specialized models. So there are models in the models ecosystem. There are a lot of ecosystems around, the Amazons of the models. Like, for instance, NVIDIA has an ecosystem, Hugging Face has an ecosystem. So you can find out specialized models. Or if your organization has the wherewithal and you have the data, the humongous amount of data that is required for developing those models, you can create those models yourself. I mean, within your organization.
And the model that you use, presumably you're doing that for a variety of reasons. One would be cost, because you don't build it yourself. Two is, and I'm not saying this is the right order, accuracy, that the data is more relevant to the user. It's just more of a getting more profound and useful information. And the third, is clearly another element of cost, which is that tokenization and the use of tokens is more effective or efficient. And maybe that last one is really a speed question, right? A speed to getting the right answer versus iterating multiple times. Is that within the realm of on target?
Yeah, the elements are all correct. And they are all very critical to the entire, the ecosystem that I just mentioned. So you have to build the model, so for which you have to have the data, the humongous amount of data to train the models, which is going to be an expensive process. The model training is going to be an expensive process, model training and inferencing both, because you need capital investment. The operational expenses may not be that high, but your capital expenses are going to be huge, because you need GPU clusters with NVIDIA chips and et cetera, et cetera. There are alternatives, but may not be that powerful. So those are capital costs that are involved. Token costs. Using frontier models, you will spend a lot on token costs. If you are using your own models, then you don't have that. That part of the OPEX is gone to almost zero. The real advantage is going to be the domain specificity and the accuracy of answers. Now, there are a lot of information that these frontier models, so the frontier models are built using a lot of publicly available data. Now, there are a lot of information in your particular domain that may not be publicly available, and you want models to be developed will have those domain-specific information. So you gather those information, train your domain-specific models, and there you go. You have your own specific models.
How does a RAG model fit into this world of context engineering? Is the RAG by definition a context engineered model, or how would you describe this? I'm not the qualified person to speak to this.
Yeah, no problem. So RAG is a specific type of architecture which includes context engineering. So RAG is basically, now still it is an expensive process, because you need to set up those GPU clusters and et cetera, which is probably not within your wherewithals, right? Your
Correct.
Organization is not so.
In most organizations, would like some flavor of an out-of-the-box solution.
Right. So let's say you cannot do that, because it is expensive and it is time consuming and et cetera, but you still need that domain specificity, right? And that domain specificity will have to come from a small set of data. I mean, that small set of data can also be pretty large, But then compared to the amount of data that is required to meaningfully develop models, train models, it's going to
relatively
be
small.
much, much smaller. When you have that kind of cases, then RAG architecture is one of the solutions. So what you are going to do is that you're going to take your data, instead of using that data to train a model, you are going to convert that into embeddings and host them in specialized databases, which are called vector databases, which host vector embeddings, right? Now, those vector embeddings, data or text stored or information stored in the form of vector embeddings will have the capability of semantically respond to your questions, right? So if you ask a question in human language, you can implement a RAG architecture to get you back the answer in human language using the information which is stored in the form of vector embeddings. So that is the alternate solution to the previous one.
And to what extent does the user input, and I can give you a lot of examples in recent experience of my own, whether I was cooking a meal and using AI to comment and critique on what I needed to change, to moments before playing with some various instruments, and the model had decided that it wished me a good meal while I played my instruments in the background. It created a very descriptive and interesting way of wishing me well in the evening, and I found that to be interesting. And it recently I asked a question of AI. It was kind of a creative question, and it said, "That's so Paul." I just started to laugh because it is, I guess, context began to understand me. Right?
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to.
Absolutely.
It comes down to whether an organization wants the models to understand it and its people, or the problem a researcher is looking to solve. To what extent, maybe there's a balance. To what extent does the human input, the real person, my own experience or your own experience, interacting with the model, the context engineering? Or is that outside of the realm of context engineering? That is just an input to the context.
This example that you have just cited is a very smart example of context engineering. So let's understand one thing about large language models. They don't know you. They don't have a memory. You ask a bunch of questions to a large language model. After asking the first question, they will not remember that previous question when you are asking the second question. Now that brings us to the point we will start thinking. Then the question is going to come into our mind that how ChatGPT remembers everything or Gemini remembers everything about all our conversations and can personalize responses or personalize the interactions that we are having with them. It's not to do with the large language model. It is to do with the smart context engineering that they have implemented. So what they are doing is that they are, apart from answering your questions, they are capturing the conversation as memory. Now that's not going to get stored in the large language model's memory. It is going to go into the application that is ChatGPT or Gemini or DeepSeek, etc., and get stored in their server against your account. Now, the next time you are asking a question, they are going to make a very smart retrieval of that context. And we also have to be conscious that we are having a lot of conversation with them. So that means that that memory is getting swelled and it's becoming humongous.
And
right?
costly.
And costly. And every time you cannot send the entire set of conversations that I was having with Gemini for the last 1 year and expect an answer back. That is going to be humongously costly and time consuming and will require huge amount of processing power from the hosting infrastructure. So that's not feasible. So what they are doing is that they are very smartly extracting the important information from all your conversations, and they are also compressing the conversations into little chunks or little bites, right? So there is a lot of technicalities that there is, and they also do not reveal the exact techniques that they use, but compression of the conversations, extraction of the important information from the conversation is what they are actually doing, and hence you are getting the response back, good morning, good evening, and this is so Paul.
And this is so Paul.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess the question will be obviously, and certainly within grades of your account, if there will, the free ones, the paid ones, the pro version, the platinum versions, etc., where it will store more, it'll retain more, it'll provide maybe a longer life to that memory. All right, and as you said, it's quite different than the world of Bing and Google search back in the day, when really what they needed to know is whether you like chocolate and guitars, and they should show you those advertisements. These are much more sophisticated models that are, it would seem to me, by a quantum leap, more complicated, and particularly in a world where everyone now is hungry for more and more and more of this. We all know about the demands on computing power, and so how does an organization, because obviously one of the biggest concerns, because that's where a lot of the usage is taking place, how does an organization evaluate to what extent, I don't know the exact question how I'd frame it, but to what extent they spend a lot of time in personalizing that information, and how they make the decision of balancing the computational cost, time, and storage, and everything else that goes around that to the problem, right? If someone comes on a chat bot and they're asking about their airplane ticket, they're pretty easy, and they can remember that last time they asked for a trip between Delhi and London, and this time, okay, they might want to go on the same route, but this is multidimensional, way beyond that kind of problem. So in an organization, when they start to really get personalized experiences, I imagine we're going to see a really complicated balancing act that organizations are going to need to decide to what extent do we store and save this information, how do we deploy it, and so I guess the risks in project success are going to go up. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and there are lots of trade-offs in a lot of different dimensions in the question that you have asked. So let's say, for instance, balancing of what? One is cost. So the cost is going to be involved in terms of the token consumption that you are having in the conversations. Now, let's take a step back and understand, when we are talking about enterprises in this context, what do we mean? We have been giving the examples of ChatGPT, interacting with ChatGPT. That's a different ballgame, and the enterprise use cases of AI usage is a completely different thing. So when we talk about enterprise use cases, that means that you are baking AI calls or LLM calls within your application, right? Now, would you have the same features of context compression or memory compression or information extraction from the conversations just like ChatGPT does? None of that. So all the smart features that ChatGPT, we are experiencing through ChatGPT, Gemini, DeepSeek, etc., are absent when we are dealing in enterprises with these LLM APIs. It gives you the model, no memory, you ask a question, the model has the wherewithal, the knowledge within it because of the training that they have, and it gives you the answer back. Memory management, token management, it is completely upon us. So the smarter we become in context engineering, we are going to achieve a few things. One is token optimization. Because when you are working in organizations and you are working with AI implementations, you are talking about a lot of people, thousands of people accessing that LLM through API calls from within your application thousands of times, right? Multiplied by 10% under-optimized token utilization, that adds a humongous cost, right? Then, if your context is under-optimized, then the time to process those amount of context will also be suboptimal, and hence the user experience is going to degrade. Number three, if your context engineering is suboptimal, then you are probably not giving the right information to the LLM to process that information. So your users are not going to get back the right answer. So from multiple dimensions and multiple fronts, context engineering becomes extremely important. The context engineering that is done by ChatGPTs and Geminis of the world smartly on their conversational assistants, which is ChatGPT or Gemini, the same thing has to be done, or better things have to be done, different situation, different context engineering solutions within the enterprise application using AI.
And particularly when you think of enterprises as being little communities inside of a company, as anyone who's worked for a bigger company realizes there's so many different parts of that company, they're not a monolith, that you'd really have to engineer the solution, whether it's departmental or lines of divisions or other areas, so that you're this purpose is not only to get the better answer, but to save money in the token usage and the storage and everything else. So there's probably a series of common questions that are asked in the common teams. What are those commonalities? Where are they located? Yeah, it's fascinating how, I guess, I have another question regarding this. Is sort of maybe come out of the blue, but to what extent is context engineering an attempt to recreate the human mind or the human memory or the human experience? And is that a wise move? I'm not asking the question from a societal or maybe a consumer facing version, but from an organizational, whether it's a university or a not-for-profit or a for-profit company. To what extent is that a wise move, and should it be more narrowly focused? Is that kind of, if you were to try to recreate the human mind, you might go out of business very fast and not solve a problem. So I don't know if I'm asking a clear enough question, but to what extent does an organization need to be, for lack of a better word, more mercenary in the application, to be very clearly and tightly focused on what are we doing and how are we doing it to get a result, and not boil the ocean, as I like to say, to, instead of when you need a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, right? Yeah. So that balance between this is fantastic and we can recreate the human mind and this will be a brain in the sky and it'll solve all of our problems and we don't have to have any employees anymore, versus let's optimize someone's role or someone's job.
Absolutely. Now, I think the answer is hidden within your question itself. So human mind, creation of the human mind, I can possibly relate that to creation of the models. So the models are very broad-based, unless we are talking about very domain-specific models or task-specific models. The frontier models that we are seeing right now are very broad-based. They can answer literally, they have a huge base of knowledge across all domains that we can possibly perceive. And they can possibly answer every question that you may have in your mind. Not your organization-specific answers, of course, because they didn't have those information while the models were trained. Of course, you won't. Any organization will not give their data. And the second part of the question is that, like a mercenary, you have to pinpoint the place where the answer to your question is hidden, and that is the art of context engineering. Work with your prompt and work with the information you are attaching to the prompt, which is the payload that is going to the large language model to cook your answer and give it back to you, is context engineering. So the more precise it is, the better your answers are going to be. So your mind is the large language model and your pinpointed focus is context engineering. And there are lots of different techniques within the field of context engineering. We can possibly touch upon some of them.
To what extent do you think we are moving towards a universe or a world in which the context engineering expert that you described is the context? In other words, is a self-correcting mechanism or another model that has been designed to address your own context? Does that make any sense? Is that a fantasy or is that a bizarre hallucination?
That is an excellent question. So for doing that, you need to implement those mechanisms within your architecture, large language model application architecture.
To begin with.
To begin,
begin with.
To begin with.
So you have to have thought three chess moves ahead.
Yes.
On some level.
Right. So your context architecture or your AI application architecture with the complex context engineering layers is already pretty heavy. Now you're talking about, can my application, AI application, my large language models be used to fix my context and check if the context was adequate? Now, how do you check that? You can only figure out whether your context was correct from the results that you get from the context, and your LLM calls from that using that context, right? So there is something called evals, right? So you use a lot of different techniques to evaluate the answers that you're getting back from your large language models using the context that you have given, so that it can be deterministic, software driven. Say, for instance, I'm implementing fixed patterns. So you are asking for fixed patterns of responses. You can implement hard deterministic mechanisms to check those. You can use AI as a judge, right? So use AI to find out the correctness of the response. So that's AI as a judge. Or HILT, human in the loop. So that's human intervention or human review of the content or the response that has
Which
come
would be
back.
expensive, though.
Which is going to be expensive.
And I don't know if maybe it's even more, maybe less expensive than the model checking itself. I don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, could be.
So the smart move is that if you can automate 80%, even 80%, 70, 80% of the review work using the LLM as a judge, that's going to be a smart thing to do.
It's fascinating how. So someone once asked me about this context engineering. Humans said humans forget things strategically, sometimes deliberately, right? Bad memories, bad experience. Is a model? I don't know if there's any concept of a model strategically forgetting things. You know, purging something because it was. And this relates to this other question I have, and so it's a little bit of a complicated question of governance. Mm-hmm. You know, whether it's compliance with the law and speech, or what has been happening with abuse of people online, whether it's harassment, whether it's sexual explicit images that have been occurred, et cetera. So to what extent can you get a model to, or do you need to design the model to have the strategic ability to forget? I don't know if that's...
Right. So actually, rather than the model, if you are developing AI applications, you need to build that in your context engineering itself. So some of the model providers like Claude, ChatGPT, they have their guardrails present within the models themselves. So when you ask a question which is malice or sexual or harm related, etc., they will come back with an answer that they are not able to respond to those kind of questions. So these are model built-in guardrails.
Like many of the questions around, you know, recite the lyrics to something song, and they say, well, I'm not allowed to do that.
Right.
So those are designed around human intervention, human in the loop.
No. So those are guardrails that are built in within the model themselves.
Okay.
But the question is, can I trust the model to intervene in all kind of scenarios? And can I trust all kind of models, all the providers? And there are recent news items which say that there are certain model providers which do not really honor standard expected guardrails of content creation. Like, for instance, allowing deepfakes or allowing the generation of sexually explicit images, etc. So there are so we have this problem. Can we intervene in all scenarios? And the next question is, can we trust all the model providers? So the answer is no, we should not, right? So there can be loopholes. There are certain scenarios that can be slipped. So in such cases, those guardrails have to be built in within your context engineering. So not only those guardrails, but also there are new kind of cyber threats that are emerging with new type of applications, that large language based application, context injection, right? So all these things have to be built in as guardrails within your context. So you have to build in those instructions that if you encounter a question like this or a request like this, please disapprove.
So what is context injection? Or did you say
Prompt injection.
Prompt injection.
Right. So prompt injection is that, so you have a prompt within your application. So you have written that, so that's a element within your program. Right. So prompts are also elements within your program. So you have to construct it differently than our commonly understood patterns of interaction with ChatGPTs and Geminis. Right. So a prompt is an element in your application, in your program. So when you're doing that, there can be hacking mechanisms which can corrupt that prompt. So essentially, one common technique is you have a prompt and somebody injects an addendum saying that now forget everything above and do this instead. So then if your large language model encounters that instruction, so it will tend to forget everything that is written in your prompt, in your application, and comply by the instruction that is injected. Right? So you need to build in these guardrails in your context engineering.
So it's a version of malware.
Yes.
Because it could be to do something malicious inside of the organization.
Yes.
Or maybe even to the extent these become robotically enabled.
Absolutely.
This is kind of interesting as it relates to cybersecurity. Obviously, cars are becoming very digital.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Driving or information they have, and there's been a lot of discussion about how do you protect a car against cyber attacks. And you can imagine, I mean, the most trivial things we see today is, a lot of the Android Auto or other things do not allow you to type. Sometimes you have to speak. So I could easily imagine someone with a Wi-Fi connection to your car injecting malicious instruction. And if that is AI created, what you're describing is it might go off the road. And I mean, literally in this case, but in the case that we're talking about a model and an injection of a malicious prompt.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that can happen. I mean, there's an absolute possibility. So essentially, your security engineers will implement all kind of mechanisms, including firewalls and SSL certificates and et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of sophisticated mechanisms, but if the prompt injection slips through and corrupts your prompt, then it can do anything.
So what's interesting is what one of the many takeaways that I'm taking from this conversation is that a lot of the concerns are strategic. You have to make the right strategic decisions, the plan, the thinking through these challenges that will come up along the way, whether they're cost or speed or accuracy or malice or governance. And these are kind of a multidimensional, it's like really a multidimensional chessboard. So, when organizations and, as I said, universities and others think about these problems, many things in many organizations come down to, is it making money or is it saving money? And one of these two, maybe not the only nor correct dimensions, but, in the case of AI models, that's going to be a big question, right? And there's big concerns about whether this is a wonderful, joyride or whether it's really going to bring value to organizations and the clients and the customers and the people they serve. So I don't know if there's a series of metrics that you can come up with. Is there, when you advise organizations about these types of challenges, how do they, how do you, like the expression, which I hate to use in India, but it's often a humorous one, how do you eat the elephant one bite at a time? You don't eat elephants, but how do you take this problem and slice it into meaningful, smaller pieces so that you can not be overwhelmed and either, sorry for all the mixed metaphors, but like a deer in the headlights, right? You're just not knowing which way to run because there's so much of this balancing and choices that have to be made at the beginning.
Absolutely. So if you talk about software engineering as a principle, there are multiple different aspects within it. Your performance architecture, your security architecture, your hosting architecture, and so on. All those disciplines make your software robust, user-friendly, usable, scalable, maintainable, etc., etc. So the context engineering with respect to our new AI kind of application, AI-driven applications, is going to be the new dimension added. So this is going to be another software engineering or software architecture dimension that we have to build in.
And a critical one.
And a critical,
and a quite
very-
critical one, whereas you've described
Absolutely.
you could be building problems and not solving them. You're sort of
Yes,
building what
absolutely.
seems to be a solution, but you've just built more. And
Yes.
it's big problems. Like technical debt.
Absolutely.
You can be building a lot of technical debt if
Absolutely.
you do not solve this at the get-go.
Yes.
It's a fascinating conversation. It's a fascinating topic,
Right.
and it's obviously something cutting edge in the world today. When I first got into the education business over 20 years ago, I was fascinated with one client who was one of your former employers, had approached me and us about how to help them build competency frameworks. These were knowledge, skill, and a behavior database. And then they wanted to figure out, okay, well, what people needed to know what things in the organization, which involved a lot of interviewing and discussions, and therefore we ultimately built a job specs or a job definitions database. And we realized the job definition database was linked to the competency database, and then we realized, well, if I could assess someone in their role with those skills, I could figure out what the automated training needs are. So this became what, at the time, we called the Performance Management Toolkit. And it was fascinating. We went all over the world, and organizations were I mesmerized by it, if that's the right word. Wow, how can you actually do this? Fast forward to today, and as I like to say, it takes 20 years to become an overnight success. We've rolled out a tool, which you're driving in terms of the technology, that is doing that in real time to hyper-personalized learning, so that organizations and universities and others that serve consumers looking to learn things can learn so more effectively and efficiently. How do you think this journey proceeds? What does a Journeybuilder look like today, and what does it look like in a few years?
Right. So the pre-AI age is the edtechs of the world, where we have off-the-shelf courses, right? You want to learn Java, you go to one of the edtech platforms, and you have got hundreds of very high-quality titles listed there. You buy them, study, and you get skilled.
Right.
Now that was about let's say 2 or 3 years back, and majority also continue. Majority today continue in this
Of
in
course,
the same
and will
mode.
continue.
Yeah, this will continue still for many years. Now then, there is another shift that is going on, is that self-driven learning. Now, off-the-shelf learning is that you have pre-populated content, right? You have to learn what is available there in that particular course. But I want to learn X, Y, and Z, and there is no course which gives me only X, Y, and Z in a way that I want it.
Yeah, and you might have wanted it in a podcast, you might have wanted it in reading, you might have wanted it in a video.
Absolutely.
There are multiple
Right?
flavors,
Yes.
as you just said. There are multiple formats now.
So the format and the structure, the mode should be in our choice. So you look at social media, and the choices we have digitally are enormous, and
Yes.
the learning has to also move that way. So Journeybuilder is actually the direction towards towards the right direction of going ahead of the changing consumer choices of, I want to take control of my learning. I will define what I want to learn, not when I want to learn. You can have on-demand courses now in all those platforms. What I want to define, what I want to learn, how I want to learn.
Yes.
And
So
that
you
has
could-
to be on my mobile phone.
Yeah. And so you could decide that you want to learn, it's kind of one of the first things that when you talk to our Astro agent on Journeybuilder, one of the first questions we ask is, how do you prefer learning? Now, I have read a lot of books in the past. I think I've read, and that's the wrong word, I'll use in a second, but it's like 180 books in the past 2.5 years. Well, I did not read any of them, really. Most of them, 90%, 95% of them were audiobooks. I love consuming things with audio. Some people don't like that at all. They want to feel the texture of a book, and they will want to flip through the book. So the idea of the medium is really important. So like I said, the medium is the message. And so all of these, the ability to hyper-personalize this experience down to the individual layer. So it's really a series of choices they will make as to what resources they want to put in front of their students or their learners, their professionals, and in what flavor those will come out, whether those are in video or audio or other formats. So do you envision a platform, whether it's Journeybuilder or others, that can create or formulate the best of both worlds for each user? So that I like audiobooks, but I also like short videos, but I'm also interested in getting deeper into that video. Do you envision a world where a tool like Journeybuilder or other tools come into this hyper-personalization, and not only in the content, but in the way they're delivered, the mix and match of flavors that people want, which is so vast?
Absolutely. And that is why we are developing the Journeybuilder Studio, which gives us the ability to create those mix and match developed courses or journeys, so to say, the term that we use in Journeybuilder. So in those journeys, we will be having the ability to create AI-generated content, be it small snippets of videos, podcast, and AI-generated text, simulations. We will use the personalization from user information and user habits to deeply simulate their choices in the simulations that we are going to build, assessments that we are going to build, and also take feedback from the user behavior to keep on getting better for that particular user. So these abilities within our Journeybuilder Studio is going to give us an edge over other traditional modes of learning that is existing today, and more control to the authors as well as the students.
One of the things that I found fascinating, and it's actually going back in the day, there was an application before Google called Ask Jeeves, and they would serve up samples of questions, and you would actually be able to see what other people were asking in the world. So they would, literally someone asked a question and showed up on the bottom of the search bar. Another question, you were fascinated by the breadth of questions that people were asking. So one of the challenges I find is, I think we've talked about this before, is that, AI is pretty easy is the wrong word, but it easily serves up answers. The biggest challenge I've seen, and this is even when you interview someone, is to come up with a clever question. And clever is the wrong word, but to come up with a meaningful question. And when you are trying to build a hyper-personalization engine, we have to figure out, how do we come up with good questions, help the user provide good information that is relevant to them. Meaning, if you're early in your career, you may not know the question to ask, right? As you get more senior, more experienced, you have a comfort level of asking questions, right? Because you've seen it, you've done it, you've had those experiences before. Someone who is less experienced coming out of high school or college or even early in their career often doesn't have an idea what question to ask. So what is your vision of the ability of a tool, any tool, to solicit the right questions from someone, or to solicit questions that tell me more about you and how I coach you to greater skill or knowledge or ability?
So this is about user experience and making the user, or equipping the user with more tools to ask the right question. So some of the things that I can readily think of is that, one, capture history and help with the history, because sometimes what you are asking, you may have already asked before. So instead of writing or memorizing, trying to recall memory, you have that in hand from your history of conversations, so you get help. So this is a very small feature. Second is providing the user the ability of using AI where they are asking the question. So in our user interface itself, if we provide AI snippets, an AI button, that they write half the question and the AI completes the final, the complete answer.
Yeah.
Make it more specific and give more choices, and et cetera,
Right.
et cetera. So literally guide the user to frame the right question and make it more specific.
It's fascinating how I think one of the changes that was occurring early in the various AI models that were available to the consumer was, first it would give you an answer and that was it. That was a dead end.
Yeah.
It was a dead end. It was not a dead end because it got you an answer. Now it prompts you to 3 or 4 alternative things that it might do next. Would
Yes.
it's created a white paper. Would you like me to distill it to two paragraphs for a social media post? So these are things that an AI brain working at the speed it does has the ability to prompt you to think of the next thing. It's kind of like, I mean, it's almost like, you put a bunch of carrots on the road and the horse moves forward.
Absolutely.
But that's critical to engineering a product. You talked about usability.
Absolutely.
Usability is not just, is it pretty, or is the button in the right place? It's that what we talked about earlier of context, getting the person's context right.
Yeah.
Because if it prompted me and I was, let's say, a biologist who worked behind the scenes and I love biology, if it prompted me to say, after I did my research paper, and it said, would you like me to come up with a social media post? I would think that's the most ridiculous thing imaginable, right? So coming up with the next prompts
Yeah, that's right.
is a skill, or a technical skill anyway.
So the best use case of this ability, and this is also context engineering, right? So you bake in those prompts in such a way that you tell the LLM, all right, so you respond to my question, but also think of the next best question that the user may ask. Use the cue from the question that is already asked that is a current question, but also from what you know about this user,
person, yes.
right? So personalization as well as the current question is your ingredient for coming up with the anticipated next set of questions. What is the best use case for this capability?
And this is really what a teacher
Sales.
does, right? This is what a teacher does,
Yes,
because a
yes.
teacher, usually and actually Khan Academy is fairly famous for having whatever their AI is called, ask the student a question when the student asks for the answer,
Yeah.
right? And that's a really critical element of building skills, building knowledge, building confidence.
Yeah.
Knowledge, skills, and ability. Ability, is the confidence to have take the next step.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that reinforcement of skill building
Absolutely.
through the next question, and maybe the next question should be marginally more stimulating. So
Yeah,
it
that
stimulates me in a direction that, wow, that's interesting. I should go in this direction.
Yes.
A, B, and C, like I said before, but it stimulates me to think, yeah, C is really interesting. I should pursue that question.
Absolutely.
And I find that to be, the really one of the great potentials for a tool that is hyper-personal. It's not just to generate, Shazam, we produced a video that seems to be relevant to you, and Shazam, we produced curated some courses and some video snippets and some chapters in books, etc. But it's then stimulating the discussion or the engagement or the building to the next level. And so the next time it builds a journey, it is even better, because we realize the person went to C or A, and therefore we know more about their proclivities.
Absolutely. And this is guided learning. Now, this guided learning, this will come better when you know about the person and know the goal of that particular learning. So if we know that, a technologist is going to learn React.js, we need to ask at the beginning, the Journeybuilder, in Journeybuilder, we have built in this features that we ask the question, what are you learning React.js for? What is your level? So when we know this information about this person, we can better prompt the next steps of their learning, and take them to the right direction with the right assessments, right learning snippets, and so on.
That's fascinating, because that's exactly what has happened in the past. When you say to someone, let me show you how to build a journey, what would you like to learn? They say something like React.js, and then I would prompt them, being the person in the room, and they'd say, well, what do you want to do this for? Oh, to build a marketing app. And I say, and they might say India, they might say Denmark, they might say in, something that is, and that kind of, or the sort of, autocomplete, if you will, is really creating that fire. It's kind of, there's a kindling, there's a little bit of fire, and it's putting wood on the fire.
Absolutely.
Keeps that flame, sorry to use this, fairly flowery approach, but it's keeping that flame alive of education and learning and moving forward which I think AI has the potential to do. And
Absolutely.
this tool seems to be one of the more leading edge tools that can help do that.
More personalized, more control to the learner, and more effective. So what you were learning in 3 days before, you'll probably finish that learning in 1 day
Yes.
with AI.
Or sooner.
Yeah.
And the quick conclusion, I often use this example, I think you've heard it many times, where, if I want to fix a dripping faucet, I don't want to become a plumber necessarily. I might if I found it's quite fascinating.
Yeah.
But getting that specific information that leads to something else, and did you know that this faucet fits inside of a system, is something that can stimulate all sorts of creativity. I mean, to me, I think people keep saying that these tools are going to replace people. I think they're going to empower people more than has ever in history occurred. And hopefully Journeybuilder will be one of those tools that sits on people's desktops or in their phone or in their earbud.
Absolutely. And that is going to be the right direction, because we are taking the direction of where the technology is going, giving more choices to the consumer, the learner, and personalizing it to what they want to learn, how they want to learn. Thank you.
Thank you. We all love meeting interesting people. Meet the Gurus is my adventure with you, traveling the world, connecting with people all over with different insights from technology and business, entrepreneurship and design, all sorts of things that help us understand what we do in our lives, our careers, and how we can be bigger and better, happier and more satisfied, all the things that we would like to achieve. Come join me.